reading Industry Week magazine. They do a review of this book called The Goal, A Process of Ongoing Improvement by Goldratt and Jeff Cox. So I get excited about it. I start studying it. And next thing you know, I'm a Jonah, which means I've been certified in the logical thinking process of what Goldratt called the theory of constraints. Today, I consider it a law. It's a proven fact. Every business has constraints. Well, along that path, I run into this thing called lean. I actually ran into first the Toyota production system, which is outstanding. And I have a colleague who wrote a great paper, which we'll share in the notes to people at the end of the program. He wrote this great explanation of what TPS or lean is. He said it's only two things, okay? One, eliminate waste. And everybody in lean gets that. What has not translated well to the outside of Japan in traditionally auto manufacturing is the second pillar. Again, there's only two in our world, and that is mutual respect for others. Now, what lean's all about, in my favorite book, by the way, and we'll include a link in the show notes, my favorite lean book isn't a lean book at all. It's called Certain to Win by Chet Richards, who actually is happening to be doing a live cast on another network, as we say. Chet was good friends with somebody called Colonel John Boyd, the OODA loop, which I think almost everyone in business has heard of. So long story short, Bill Detmer, who is the chronicler of the theory of constraints, bumps into Chet because of Boyd. And next thing you know, I'm excited about lean, or what I prefer to call TPS. And I've done projects across the country, hundreds of them. And what I do is I approach everything as a project. So when Mike and I were working on something else earlier this year, we said, hey, let's get together and do something and talk about projects and lean. And in the world of TOC, the theory of constraints, we call it critical chain project management. So that's how we got here.
Just to make sure that everybody is following that of what we're talking about, I heard you say the acronym TPS, and I'm making a general assumption. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Toyota Production System?
Correct.
Okay. Maybe if you can give us all a little bit of the history of where, I'm assuming you're quite well versed on the subject,
Yeah.
of where TPS comes from and why it is such a basic tenet of what you believe in.
Yeah, well, it's the basic tenet. It's the roots of what we know as lean, which started out as lean manufacturing, lean thinking. You know, the book, what was it? Something about I think it was called The Machine That Changed the World. That was all rooted.
That's correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
That was all rooted in TPS, the Toyota Production System. It's since been used in a bunch of other environments, some more successful than others. So the essence, think about this. In the US, I think it was 1988, we introduced something called the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. I think it was 1988. Mm-hmm. Okay. In Japan, they've had the Deming Award since 1954. That's why Japan took us to school in quality, because they've been following Deming's lead and paying attention to it for a lot longer. And that's kind of the roots of it. But one of the key components of TPS and lean is this thing called eliminate waste. And the reason, okay, to me, the reason for doing something is everything. The reason Toyota did this is they wanted to shorten the amount of time from when someone says, I want to buy a vehicle, until they actually take possession of it. And so if we can eliminate all kinds of waste, I've heard 8, in some cases 9 different types of waste. I think the standard is probably 7 or 8. But if we can eliminate things, then we can get to delivering the vehicle sooner rather than later. And what Goldratt brought to the table, he invented this thing in the production world called drum buffer rope. Okay, DBR, we often say. And it started out like Toyota Production System, and lean started out in manufacturing, but it's been applied to everything, including projects. Well, why is that important? What he found out in a manufacturing environment If you follow Japanese manufacturing law, you know about these Kanban cards that say, hey, we're now approaching the end of the parts. We send this card up the chain and say, I need more of these parts. Okay. So that's kind of the sense of, that would be in a sense a rope. It's a mechanism to say, we need more of something. Well, the buffers say, if you have a constraint, if you find out that a particular machine, for example, can only go so fast, we need to buffer some work in front of it. Only makes sense. And the better we keep track of the buffer, the better our throughput, which is the magic metric for business. Throughput says to me, my vernacular is, how much more money can I put in my pocket? Because I work with privately held firms. I don't do any work with publicly traded companies. I had a client sell out to a publicly traded company. I can't help them. All they care about are quarterly numbers. I'm interested in putting more money in my pocket, in the pockets of the employees in the company. So long story short, Goldratt then set his sights on project management and said, got to be a better way to do this. Well, he figured out he could apply this thing called drum buffer rope to projects. And so from the lean vantage point, we're saying, how can we eliminate waste? Well, this is the beauty, and I'm going to recommend his book that he wrote a number of years ago called Critical Chain. And he explains, and if you're a lean aficionado or agile, you're going to understand the concepts instantly as you read this book. And by the way, he wrote most of his books as a business novel. So what that means is he took real live case studies, hid the names of the participants, protect the guilty and the innocent, and he turned them into business novels. And people read them and think, well, that's entertaining, but that won't work where I'm at. Well, it does work, and it will work if you take some time to figure out the nuances, to translate it. So anyhow, Critical Chain is written in a college environment, college or university. And in the book, he uses one of the examples is an executive MBA, management. My mind went blank. Like MBA, Masters of Business Administration. He used that as an example in there, and they were talking about projects. And so he overlaid over top of it, let's eliminate the waste of everybody who touches a project. And this is simply brilliant. And a lot of people don't get it. The first time you read it, it's like, well, it can't be that easy. It can't be that simple. Well, there's two basic premises besides the fact that in the background, everything's based on drum buffer rope. Okay, the drum is, we got to say go so fast. The machine goes this rate. That's the drum. Your constraint, the weakest link, only goes so fast. Okay, the rope ties everything together so that the buffer's always full in front of it. Okay, and the buffer says here's some work waiting to be worked on, and that's what projects are. If you're a resource mic on a project, you've got some stuff ahead of you. So when you finish the project you're on, right, there's something waiting on your desk that's next. Does that make sense?
Certainly does. And it leads me to a number of additional questions that I would have. Yeah. First of all, directly tied to that of what you just mentioned, for me, it's all tied to this idea of work in progress, which for me, which is a basic tenet of not only what Goldratt was talking about, but the key constraints that we have tied to running projects efficiently. So perhaps if you can talk about that concept a little bit, I think it would be quite useful.
Yep. So we've got this mechanism, a framework, a methodology, drum buffer rope, and we say, okay, Mike, you're working on a project and you've got several projects ahead of you because let's say you're the best at fashioning these particular widgets, okay? And so our company makes 3 different widgets and we're going to need some of your expertise, right? So Goldratt says we're going to think in terms of drum buffer rope. And now I'm going to ask you, Mike, I need you to work on this particular model. Let's call it A. And so I need an estimate for you to work your magic on this. How long is this going to take you to do your magic on part A for this project for me? Pick a number, so many minutes or hours. I'm serious. That's a real question, Mike. Pick a number.
Oh, for me, but 5 hours.
Okay, great. 5 hours. So we're going to go to everybody that needs to touch this project, and we're going to get an idea. Okay, we're going to build a project plan like everybody has built. Probably one of the most popular tools is Microsoft Project. But if you're small, you can use a spreadsheet, or you might use some other fancy software. I'm a big fan, by the way, of Scrum. And I don't know how many TOC people are, but I would suggest a lot of Agile people are. Tesla's obviously.
I think your assumption's correct, Jeff.
So you told me 5 hours. And let's say Fred,
That's right.
the next guy down the line,
5
says,
hours.
next guy down the line says 10 hours. And the next guy down the line says 20 hours. Okay? So I'm going to give you those 5 hours, and what's going to happen? You're going to try to finish up the last project you were on, or you're going to try to get ahead of the next one. And you're going to say, oh my God, I told him 5 hours. My 5 hours are almost up. I gotta do something on this. And so now you work feverishly, and your boss interrupts you. And he or she says, wait a minute, Mike, I know you got to get that done.
Oh, that never happens, Jeff. Come on, let's be honest.
Well, Goldratt called this bad multitasking. And why do we label it bad? Because in fact, there are good multitasking, like a receptionist in an office. She can't not, or he cannot not answer the phone because somebody walked in the door. They have to do both things. They have to grab the phone and say, wait a minute. So there's good multitasking. But you, Mike, you might be guilty of bad multitasking. And one of the charts that we weren't able to get to show you is, if we take those three things, within 5 hours, you should be done with your piece and hand it off to Fred. But that's not going to happen in reality because of all these interruptions, because of bad multitasking. So it's going to take you a minimum of 10, maybe 15 hours to get that done. That project's going to be late. And one of the reasons you do that is because the boss is saying, well, I've got to tell the guy on project, on this other project, we're making progress. So Mike, tell me something. And they're going to force you, or try to bad multitask. Goldratt said, let's take everybody's estimates, add them all together, and cut it in half. Okay, so Mike, you only get 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But you are not allowed to work on anything else. When you pick that
That's
up,
the key. That's the key, Jeff.
That's how we eliminate waste. It's
right.
Wasteful for you to have 5 hours when you only need 2.5.
Which leads me to another subject, which would all be tied to buffer, but I want to ensure that we make the session as interactive as possible, and we have some questions that have come through the chat box. So first of all, Tony, thank you very much for joining us today. Tony asked the question, can your guest speaker, that would be Jeff, speak to how circular economy could apply Lean Six Sigma, throughput, etc., to better engage the business world to reuse and recycle?
Okay, Tony, if I follow the question, you mean reuse and recycle what we might consider waste?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's exactly what he's referring to.
Okay. First off, I always pull out Six Sigma as, remember those college tests? One of these items is not like the others. Okay. Lean, throughput, TOC, critical chain project management, those are all very similar. Six Sigma is not. Okay. This is about statistical proof. This is about meeting particular standards. And so it takes, in my opinion, a different mindset and a different skill set. So I will not address Six Sigma, that I have on occasion, but it's really outside my depth. So we would need somebody, what we call in my world a subject matter expert, an SME in Six Sigma, to address that piece. But to answer the question, we have to have focus. Goldratt said, if I could sum up the theory of constraints, he said I would call it simply focus. Of course, you can't charge a lot of money for a book that has 1 page in it. Plus, we don't always know what focus means, so he explained it. So how in a circular economy Well, first off, my gut reaction is in the supply chain, okay, and we've seen this time and time again. Yesterday we used to call a sub process or an output waste. Then we found out there was actually a need for that and we could actually resell it. One of the examples in the machine shop world, machining, is you'll find sometimes small privately held businesses, the owner says we're not going to report scrap, but yet they take the scrap somewhere and they sell it and he or she gets a check. And it's like, okay, we'll do something for the employees with that money. So, that's a side benefit. So there's all kinds of reuse and recycle opportunities. And again, you got to remember there's at least 7 to 9 types of waste. So when we eliminate waste, we might not actually make it non-existent. We might actually find a channel to sell it, or might actually find a use for it as an input to some other process. Back when I was growing up, I'm older than the average bear. The Japanese used to have this philosophy: we're not firing anybody. We're not laying people off. They would invent new industries to keep everybody working. Okay. So that's one of the things I love about lean or TPS, is that mindset is let's use our creative engines to figure out. So I find in every example cases where we can reuse stuff. Or here, think about this. You really want to eliminate waste. Don't do something you don't need to do. Okay. Somebody says, hey, I need a great shiny, 3D rendering, a SolidWorks drawing of this so that I can pitch it up the line.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say, well, you pitch stuff up the line and 90% of it gets rejected. So why are we spending that kind of money to have 90% of our effort rejected? Bring in an illustrator, get them to rough it out and send that up. And the 10% that gets accepted, then let's have the SolidWorks expert spend some time on it. So does that help some, Tony?
Yeah, and perhaps if I can try to summarize some of the things that you talked about, Jeff, the last example you were giving was refuse. That means you don't do it, which means it's the ultimate way of eliminating waste. Number one. Number two, in the example you gave, I thought was quite revealing, very insightful. There is a process that we have within circular economy, which is called industrial symbiosis, which means that the waste that you have can be a resource for somebody else. And that's exactly what you described. And there was a project that took place starting around 1972 in Denmark that was all managed privately. There was no public funds involved, where companies got together and had those types of conversations that you were referring to, basically describing what they do and what they produce and what they leave over. And they came to the conclusion that there was a lot of valuable resources that were considered waste by one that were quite valuable for the other. So we have a clear precedence here, and I think it was quite interesting that the way you described it. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to move. We have a few questions, so if I may move on to Hemant, who is talking about lean being a concept for production improvement. And I know this falls directly in line, Jeff, with everything you've been talking about so far. Project management, coordination to get things done. Another point that you raised, how to apply lean concept and project management. Both have different methodologies. So if I could leave that one up to you.
Yes. I like to think of it like I've been told what is at Mount Everest. I've been told there are several paths that you can take to get to the summit.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on your skill set, okay, not my skill set, depending on your skill set,
we're talking about Hemant. Now we're not talking about mine. We're talking about Hemant's.
Hemant's, depending on your skill set, Hemant, one of those methodologies or frameworks is going to suit you better, either because of your background or perhaps the industry. So I never get hung up. And that's why, I'm a big fan of Scrum, which many consider an agile tool inside TOC. And some people would say, well, we don't need it inside there. Well, I think we do. I think we need the sprints. To me, when I learned about, for example, I tend to do everything in a 2-week sprint. That works for me. And I can get stuff done. I can get some what we call in the startup world MVPs, minimal viable products. I can get some stuff done and get some feedback. So I don't get hung up. And again, we'll take a page from Colonel John Boyd, who I mentioned earlier. He called it building snowmobiles. He said, if you take apart all these different things in your garage and you reassemble them, you take a motorcycle handlebar, you take a tread off of a tractor or a tank, take all these separate pieces. He called it deconstruction and then construction. So I borrow stuff. And it's like one of the slides I want to show you, and it'll be in the handout. There's this guy, Ivers Jacobson. Now, I'm a computer programmer. I'd spent 20 plus years in software development before I got in. I've done manufacturing my whole career, but there's this guy, and he created something called use cases, Jacobson. And we introduced them in something called the UML, the Unified Modeling Language, back in the 1990s when I was a consultant at LexisNexis near Dayton, Ohio. So somebody starts this Scrum movement, I don't know, somewhere around the year 2000, and all of a sudden they got user stories. Well, guess what Ivers is doing now? He's created cards. I think they're called Scrum Essentials. Don't quote me, I'll put it in the show notes. But in the world of Scrum, we describe these user scenarios to build a timeline. And I love the burn down chart. To me, that gives me great insight. So anyhow, I don't get hung up on the tools. I use what works for me in the environment that I'm in. And again, Lean has a great vantage point when you understand that it's about eliminating waste. And don't forget what TPS taught us, mutual respect for others. And that's often missing. And that's what people don't understand, why Elon Musk is so adamant against unions. He's saying, look, we're doing these mob tasks, 4 or 5 people, no more than 6 ever on a team. And if one of those people are missing, you've just lost a third or a fourth or a fifth of your workforce. So his environment, his approach is not conducive to unions. Might he unionize parts of the business? It may happen, but he's got a different approach. In fact, in Germany, they call what he does Tesla time. There's nobody else moving as fast. I'll throw a name out there. Look this guy up, Joe Justice. I'm connected to him on LinkedIn, so you can look at me and then find Joe Justice. He worked at Tesla. He worked at SpaceX. This guy has said, think of this, there's no budgeting process as you and I know it at Tesla. We're getting kind of off topic, but to me, the best framework is the one you're most comfortable with. If you love Excel, you should use Excel.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. Perhaps, Hemant, if I can give you a little bit of some input from my perspective. I think the key here where Jeff and I are clearly in agreement is getting things done, getting things out the door, and it's all tied to throughput. And so just to add my flavor to that of what Jeff was talking about, if we are able to ensure that we get as much quality content completed in the most efficient amount of time, then it doesn't matter the way that we're doing it. If I go back to Xing Xiaoping, who actually said he didn't care if a cat was white or black as long as it catch mice, I think that kind of paraphrases, Jeff, that of what you were talking about. And I think it's quite indicative of those elements that you talked about, specifically tied to UML, because now I'm the great pleasure of having somebody that I've been in contact with quite a long time, Barash, who asked a question, is very familiar with all this. So we haven't even touched on underestimation issues or overestimation. So the idea is, and I think you kind of alluded to this one earlier, Jeff, you asked me how long it would take for me to complete an assignment, and you tried to build in a buffer. And please correct me if I got anything wrong from my interpretation, Jeff. go back to the question from Balash, and neither we mentioned that estimates do have some expectations given a team and a precision. So what would be your perspective, not just tied to the individual, to the cumulative that you described, but taking all these other elements? How do you bring that into the equation?
Yes. I actually, we kind of jumped out before I actually got to that final part. So in the critical chain project management, we take those estimates that we've cut in half and we add those three parts up. In my example, there were 3 people, right? So we add the total time that it's going to take and we put that at the very end of the project. Because in the project world, the only thing that matters is the end date. Okay. If Mike gets his part done in 1 hour, I'm afraid I cannot pat you on the back because Fred isn't ready for the part. Okay. But maybe he is. So maybe Fred's ready and he's ready to do his piece. So it doesn't matter individually. Okay. Because we're going to put all the buffer at the end. And the other thing we're going to do is we're actually going to cut it in half again, which I know scares the bejeebers out of most people. But then we're going to manage the buffers and we're going to use a system of lights, green, yellow, and red. Okay. As long as the buffer is green, that means we've got plenty of time for stuff to happen because stuff's going to happen. Okay. We're going to put some safety in there is what I'm saying. And we're going to monitor it. And once we see things that are piling up, again, another reason I like the burn down chart. If we see things are piling up and we're eating into the yellow portion of the buffer, now that says there might be some hands-on needed. So the reality is it doesn't matter if you overestimate or underestimate if the framework is sound, if it's built robustly enough to address those issues. And the best way to do that is to take all the safety from every operation, put it together, and put it at the end. And that's the only date. That's the only thing you have to protect is the ship date. Because what you want to get to is the point where the ship date, the promise date, is magic. And what you get into, we do something in the TOC world we call unrefusable offers. Okay. When we do the project plan and we don't allow any multitasking, I can look at that and say, well, guess what? Normally, we've got a 4-week lead time on this. This particular unit, for whatever reason, we can ship this in 7 days. We're not going to give it away. We're going to say, hey, if you need this in 7 days, for a premium, we can do that. We're going to do it anyhow. We're going to stick it on the shelf. But if you're willing to pay us a premium, then you can have access to it in 7 days. I love this about Mazak. I used to computerize, do CAD CAM with Mazak equipment, CNC turning and milling centers. If we needed a feature, you could just call in with a purchase order and they would give you a code to punch in and it would unlock a feature that you needed. It was built in there, just sitting there waiting for me to pay for it. Okay. So as far as over and underestimate, it's going to work out in the wash because Fred's going to guess high, Mike's going to guess low, I'm going to be somewhere in the middle, and we put all that buffer at the end. Does that make some sense?
It makes perfect sense. And in fact, because we are agile, I just want to remind everybody that we are very, very agile. I'd like to share, let's see how active I actually am. Let's see to what degree I can make this one happen. Hold on. You reminded me of a technique that we talk about quite often within Agile. Is called the cone of uncertainty. I'm not quite sure whether you have run across that one, Jeff, in that of what you've dealt with, but the idea is to clearly depict how we come to certain conclusions based upon our level of confidence. And I'm trying to call this one up. And let me see if I can do this. Share screen. Let's try it this way. Chrome tab. Oh, yes, we do. We made it happen. Let me share this one. Oh, okay, got it here. So let me kill this and move to the screen. Let me describe that element that you see on your screen. And right now. At the beginning of a project, you don't know much, and so that means that all these requests that Jeff's been talking about so far, we're making sometimes very much guesstimates, meaning that we're basing it on previous experience, what we think that will take place, but we don't have all the information required. So we're working with very vague figures. But the closer we get to that deadline, the one that Jeff has been talking about, the more precise we can actually get with our figures. So if you could see on this diagram that is appearing on your screen right now, the closer we get to that done part, the more precise we can actually be in our estimations. Balash, I think this partially gets to what you were asking. And here I went really on a limb, Jeff, to kind of interpret some of the things that you talked about. Was I off base with this?
No,
with this
no,
comparison?
no, that was good. We have a little different verbiage in a sense, but the bigger concept that we try, Goldratt came up with these 5 steps as far as, trying to determine the constraint, and you elevate it, you subordinate stuff. And what everybody said is, well, wait a minute, we really never did a good job of defining what the system is. Okay. So we have most of us that do TOC have what we call step 0, define the system. And if you're an engineer, you already know that. Engineering starts with, as I'm told in the first thermodynamics class, okay, define the system. So I guess that's where it came from, maybe from Tony Rizzo. But the other thing that's just as important that speaks a little bit to this, I think, is span of control. Okay. Now, am I going to ask Mike for an estimate for something that's not in his wheelhouse? That would be bad. Okay. Or am I going to ask him to fix a particular process in a supply chain somewhere, upstream or even downstream, okay, outside your span of control? So the only thing I would add is we've got to make sure we got the best person. And there's a great book that references the book. My mind's blank what the second book is, but it's called The Art of Profitability. So in The Art of Profitability, they talk about this book on numbers. And they said, look, you need to learn how to do calculations in your head, just round stuff off and get a ballpark. Okay. Get some kind of number and you run with it. And as you learn more, you adjust it. Okay. So if Mike said, I think I can do that in 5 hours. And if I said, Mike, have you ever done that thing before? And he says, no, I might say, well, I'm going to give it 6. Of course, I'm going to cut it in half. So it's now 3 instead of 2.5. So that's where, again, the subject matter experts are, I think, critical. I learned that term when I was consulting at LexisNexis. They have SMEs. That was a tag that we used, and you'd have to go to an SME for something. And, talking about frameworks, one of LexisNexis, which is owned by Elsevier, Reed Elsevier. Only place I ever worked, their library was bigger than mine. I always enjoyed that. But I got this new project. I did the billing actually for this Elsevier science journals. Back in the 90s, they converted them to the web. And my role at Lexis was to bill people for reading the Elsevier science journals online. And so they said, okay, we need you to do that. And I go, okay, what tools do you want me to use? They said, not our job. You're the subject matter expert. You use whatever tools you want. Think about that. Here's a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And they say, guess what? We only care about the due date. We only care about the end date. Use whatever tools you want. Within their system. They didn't want me to go buy something new, but, that's how I think you deal with uncertainty. And the other thing is it helps to know smart people. Go ahead. Next question.
No, I think that's very important what you said. And perhaps if I can partially play devil's advocate and piggyback on that of what Balish asked as a follow-up question. One of the good things, of course, from a subject matter expert is that they are very well versed in whatever the material might be that we're talking about. But there is an ugly flip side, and that is tied to bias, because they have an idea and they see it a certain way. There's a strong possibility that they are not capable of seeing perhaps what's left or right due to this bias that they have. So in this general scheme of things, that if we have the ability, and I think you were going in this direction, Jeff, in taking maybe more of a diverse public to ask that question, how long do you think it will take? Because you weren't just asking me, you were asking a number of people, right? So if you ask various people that have different levels of knowledge, then you end up taking that average, the one that you referred to, you take that average and you feel very confident within that 80-20 principle that 80% is actually pretty good for what we're trying to accomplish. And so here I'd like to go ahead and close the loop, and I'm making a lot of assumptions, and please jump in if I have anything wrong here. Going back to what Balish is asking, so as the question is expected, how do we handle insecurities in estimation? The fact is, there's always going to be insecurities with estimation, and this is going back to the point that you raised in the beginning, Jeff, and that is all tied to the buffer, that we create buffers, and you mentioned a number of times, and if we feel comfortable with the buffer that we create and with the estimates that we're able to come up with based on diverse input, then we come close enough and much better than spending a lot of time performing all kinds of analysis that doesn't bring us any added value. And I will cut it with that and give you back the stage. Sorry for that.
No, that's right. That's good. The other thing here is culture. Okay? And again, I'll pick on Elon. He says, we don't penalize people for guessing wrong. Okay. People are going to guess wrong. It's going to be their best educated guess. Hopefully it's a swag. Right? A scientific wild ass guess, but it's the best. And if you're not in a culture that understands that, we can't fix that. If the culture's broke, that's outside. And Goldratt also said, they asked him about a situation where TOC did not appear to work. And he says, well, if the people don't want to change, if they've made a decision, then I don't care how good your framework is or how good your methodology is. If they've already decided, this is the way I'm doing it, you can't help them.
Certainly you need a specific level of maturity for anything to work. It doesn't matter which methodology you're actually using. Just want to remind anyone who just kind of stumbled across this live stream together with Jeff Kinsey today, and we're talking about lean project management. And the idea is, for a number of you that I know are already established within the project management domain, if we're capable of looking at things from a different perspective, in a way that perhaps we are not necessarily been introduced to so far, in a way that allows you to perform your work in a more efficient way, in a different way, in a more productive way, that you can actually measure what's effective. I think that all of these things that we've been talking about so far today are extremely important. So if you have any questions for us, we have still a few minutes left within this live stream. Please feel free to go ahead and add those comments to the chat box, and we would love to go ahead and put you on our screen and address your questions. Jeff, I have a couple more.
Well, two things real quick.
Sure, of course, please.
I never talk about efficiencies. That's the quickest way to go broke. Effectiveness, absolutely. Efficiencies don't mean anything. And the other thing is, we're going to have a handout for you at the end of the show. We'll tell you how to reach out to us. Go ahead, Mike.
No, that's great. I was obviously going to make sure that we are able to give those people who were able to participate today, and perhaps those that watch the video later on, a goodie as a thank you from both of us for actually taking the time to participate either directly or indirectly in this live stream. But one of the things that I think are quite interesting that people don't really understand, especially, okay, we were not going to call it efficiency. I've been corrected. I'll take that one. This idea of throughput and understanding that if I am able to create things quickly, and we're not able to coordinate things properly, then that time between me completing the action and the next person being able to take it on is a clear waste, right?
Can be. The in the critical chain project management world, there are two flavors of it. There's small companies that are doing a single project in this framework, and then there are companies, say like a Boeing, that have multiple projects going on, and you might have to work on 6 different projects across 4 different business units and interact with entire other business entities within the company. So we need extra sophistication, and there's a lot of add-on tools to make either Microsoft projects smarter or to replace it entirely, so that you can manage. Because the problem with critical path, we have this concept of let's put the longest tent poles in first. Well, that works great if you have infinite resources. No business has infinite resources. We're all constrained by a resource. You only have 40-hour week. So if I need your expertise 45 hours a week, I got a problem. I'm not going to get everything done I need to get done. And then if I let you bounce from project to project, and I let people interrupt you when you're trying to get the project done, it just does not go well. So we want to eliminate that waste. We want to eliminate you having to pick up a project, try to remember where you were at, do something on it, set it down, pick up something else, try to remember where you were, get something done, set it down. That's Goldratt said that's one of the biggest wastes, multitasking.
Well, especially considering that it's an illusion, that if we think that we can give 100% concentration to 5 things at the same time, that's not technically possible. It's not physically possible to give 100% concentration to 5 different things. And the real question is whether we find the quality in that of what we're doing to be valuable enough. And then I would personally raise the question, if you do not see value in that of what you're doing, I'm just going back to what you talked about earlier, Jeff. I'm just going back. Then why are you doing it? you have to
Yeah.
you have to raise the question, well, why are we even bothering to begin with? I'm going to make one last call to all of you who are watching this live, if you have any more questions, because we are getting closer and closer to the witching hour in talking about lean project management. And I'm very blessed to have Jeff with me today, who is truly a subject matter expert when it comes to the theory of constraints and everything that was coming from Eliyahu Goldratt, who is considered to be one of the major movers and shakers when it comes to coming up with troubleshooting and developing an organization that's really focused on quality. See, I knew if I was to prompt our audience enough that I would get another question. And this is coming from Swada. Thank you very much for joining us today. What role does intuition, I love this question. What role does intuition play in the entire estimation process? Jeff, I leave this to you.
Let's oversimplify it and let's say 80-20 rule, 20%. What Goldratt's method is, it's based on deductive reasoning. Okay. Intuition can lead you down the wrong path and you won't know it for a long time. So the key factor is we use these things we call logic trees. We use cause and effect logic. And the root of it is deductive reasoning. If we see this product is always late, Okay, there's a reason. Let's look into it. So thank you for that question. Hopefully that helps. But that makes me think, in the book Critical Chain that Goldratt wrote, he gave an example, and again, these are all based on real life stories, but it's written as a business novel, of a steel mill. Okay, this guy's buying the steel mill, and they've lost millions of dollars year after year after year, and within 30 days they turned it into millions of dollars of profit. Now, how's that possible? He didn't buy any new equipment. He didn't hire anybody. He didn't fire anybody. How does a company that's lost millions and millions and millions of dollars year in and year out turn it around in 30 days? He said, we had a bad assumption. The whole plant was measured on something, efficiency, called tons per hour. And tons per hour drove the wrong behavior. If I'm measured by tons per hour and I'm running a job, if I have to stop and do a setup, which is one of the hearts of the Toyota production system, something called the time to change a die out. Okay. If we can change the focus and say, we want to deliver the product that the customer ordered when we promised it, we're not going to measure you on how many tons per hour your operation produces. You can turn your company around in 30 days or less. And that metric is alive in every business you can imagine. It's Goldratt called it common sense. But the problem when you say that is people say, well, I have a lot of common sense. But if you don't explore the possibilities, if you don't engage subject matter experts, you're not going to stumble across that subject, that common sense. So it really is uncommon common sense.
And I wonder if maybe what Swad was talking about with regards to intuition, if maybe that might be indirectly tied to that common sense that you're referring to. We